Sherman kit and diorama are now completed and I'm really pleased with the results. The diorama depicts Lieutenant David Render and it's turned out exactly how I wanted it to. Hi and welcome back to John's Hobby Workbench, where we build, paint and weather plastic model kits, dioramas and figures. So you may remember some time ago I did an inbox review on this kit and some associated parts. It's a pretty straightforward build, so let's see how we went from this to this. The plan with this model is to achieve a tank that is visually interesting to the viewer. I'm going to use the black and white pre-shading technique, so the overall paint scheme is not just one monochrome colour, but lighter and darker shades of the base green to emphasise the area of the tank where the crew would be walking, opening doors and hatches, and the way that paint naturally fades in sunlight. These are the instructions, and of course we're not going to need these, are we? Reading and studying the instructions and even making notes on the instructions is the one thing that's going to stop us from making the most fundamental mistake later in the build. After I've looked through the instructions, I've realised that there's no options icon, and that's probably because this kit originally was produced in something like 1981, so it's had additional sprues added to it continuously, and that's probably why there's so much stowage. So I've gone through the instructions and I've highlighted the options. So in the first one, you've got to decide whether you want a 3-piece or a 1-piece transmission housing. Second option you have is to decide which style of sprockets you want. And then also you can choose between the pressed or the spoked style road wheels. And then also, this is more of a tip than anything else, and it's for putting on the Commander's cupola doors, and it says to fit them at the same time when you fit your figure. So it might be an idea to do that last. And then the only other thing I found noteworthy in the instructions is fitting the periscopes, and the instructions say to do that with your turret upside down. If you fit them from the top, you'll find that the periscopes are rather large and out of scale. So that's my first tip. Once you've read the instructions, found the alternatives, highlight them with a pen. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is a straightforward build, so I'll whisk through it while I explain why I decided to build this kit. After reading Tank Action written by David Render, the paragraph about the engagement in Bleakershouse, France stood out as a really good diorama subject. The diorama depicts Render's Sherman with a captured anti-tank weapon tied to the stowage on the rear of his tank. He had picked it up as he had not seen one before of this type, and it was handed in to his superiors for evaluation and was the first Panzeschreck found in Normandy. The thought of a British tank with a German anti-tank weapon attached to it struck me as an interesting diorama idea. The paint I'm using for the primer is Mr. Surfacer, Mr. Finish Surface, 1500 black, and then I've diluted it down about 50-50 with self-leveling thinner. The airbrush I'm using has got a 0.4 needle. I'm building up the coat, nice and steady, nice thin coats, one after the other, getting in all the nooks and crannies, deep down in any crevices, to make a shadow coat later. Once the turret's painted, I'll move on to the rest of the tank. I've always found that Mr. Surfacer 1500 black is a fantastic primer. That's the hull and the turret, all nicely primed in black, all the recesses nicely painted. Get the paint down there in them recesses and then give us some shadow coating for when we finally apply the green. You'll notice I've removed the very front protective cap of the airbrush, exposing the needle at this point. This is to give a much finer spray and stop it fouling up on that protective cap, which it will do eventually. And so this gives a really nice, continuous, lovely fine spray to enable me to build up that white coating. Just slowly and gently take your time, building up the white along any panel lines and the edges of the panels themselves, any hatches, escape hatches for instance, crew hatches, engine hatches, anywhere where the light's going to naturally catch it and reflect off the surface of the tank, and also on any large panels. Get some definition in the large panels, get some lighter patches in there as you'd naturally expect to see in nature. And then with the body of the tank, exactly the same again. Any portion of the bodywork that's higher than the main structure, anything that's going to catch the light, any portion of it that's an edge, just spray it in white, build it up nice and steady. Paints I'm using for this build are going to be the new Tamiya lacquer paints, and I'm going to start off with a coat that is 80% buff and just 20% olive drab, and I'm going to switch that to 60% olive drab and 40% buff, and then if need be at the end I'll just go over with a very thin mist coat of the olive drab. I prefer to go really steady with this, just building it up nice and slowly, very thin coats, just a mist coat over it each time, build up that green layer and take out that white, that stark white, take that out just a tiny bit at a time, build it up really steady. Once you've done that, you can get it to the point where you want, just building it up. But if you go too fast, you've gone too far, and then before you know it, you've got to start again. The second coat is exactly the same idea as the first, really nice and steady, spraying it in nice thin layers to build it up in a steady progression. This clip actually takes 5 minutes, but I'll speed it up so you can get the effect of it a lot quicker. Only thing different now is we're spraying with 80% of the green and only 20% of the buff. So this is the third and final coat, and it's just LP28 olive drab, just to knock down those highlights, make it look as natural as possible but still interesting to the viewer. The tones in the olive drab now give the tank definition and volume, creating the visual effect of weathered and worn paintwork. I've just finished cleaning out the airbrush and I thought I'd show you this. It's one of my favourite products. It's Solvent Airbrush Cleaner, and I have heard one or two people in the past mention that they struggle with airbrushing, they don't get on with it, they find different colours like red and yellow difficult to get out of the airbrush, and it crossed my mind later that they might not be using this sort of solvent based cleaner. There's different ones on the market. This is the one I tend to use. It cleans your airbrush a lot more aggressive than other cleaners, and if you're not using it, this is going to be a game changer for you. So when you finish watching this video, get down to your local model shop and get yourself some of this cleaner. And if you're enjoying the video so far, why not consider subscribing? It'll help the channel out no end. Just a quick bit of explanation here. You may notice from now on in this video a difference in quality, and that's because while I've been filming this video, I've upgraded my studio equipment quite significantly, bought better lighting, better stands, better camera, but to get the filming and the quality as good as I possibly could do for this early stage of the build, I've actually gone out and purchased the second kit, and that's what you've been watching now. From here on out is the original footage. These are the additional stowage parts that I've got from Resicast. You've got the main pack that goes on the back of the tank, followed by bedrolls, a couple of wooden boxes, some backpacks, and then we move on to the tools that come with the tank, starting handle, sledgehammer, some very nice drums that are included, crowbar, jerry can, and then that's the Panzeschreck itself, completed with the photo etch on it. More boxes, spare bogey wheels, and those are the actual Panzeschreck projectiles along with its box. And then you get in the kit spare trunk link, jerry cans, and more backpacks. Probably won't use all the backpacks, but I want to put plenty on, make it look a really busy tank. The paints I've used for the main stowage on the rear of the tank are New Wood by AMIG 037, Green Base again by AMIG 916, Green Grey from Vallejo 886, and Model Air Light Brown 71027. So what this is the piece of wood that sits across the top of the transmission, and then all the stowage at the front rests against it. So I've painted it in New Wood, and then obviously it's going to be a lot darker than that. On the front side, facing forward, it's going to be almost completely black. I'm just giving it a coat of some of the earth shaders from MIG ammo, and then I'm going to make this the front, well, the piece that will be facing towards the top of the tank. So this piece, this side rather, it's going to get a lot more on it, and just give it progressive coats until it gets dark enough. The Miniart Panzeschrecks are sprayed in AMIG 278. So that's the two Panzeschreck projectiles finished. I've sprayed them in a lighter green than what were recommended, so that when they're in the box, they give us more visual effect and they don't disappear down in the bottom of the box and become almost invisible. There is a microscopic decal to go on there, but I shall do that shortly. To make fitting the tracks a lot easier, I decided to leave the bogies off. And then when I've come to fit the track, I've pushed the track up inside the track covers or mudguards, then put the bogies in position and then loop the track round and join it together. Moving on to the next part of this build, I'm going to have to do something with the hull itself, and I'm going to put something down in here. It's a new product that I've not used before, and it's AK Terrain Muddy Ground, and it looks really good. So I'll push something down onto the hull with a stirring stick, and let's just slowly build it up, run it in there. It does say that you can add water to it, but it's not really necessary. It's starting to build up now, and you can put it in any way you like. Doesn't really matter if you get it anywhere it's not supposed to be. Yeah, it looks good. I can't wait to see what it dries like, and hopefully I can use it on the upper parts of the tank as well. So I'll put a little bit around the bogies and the socket and the suspension house, make it look a lot more authentic. So my next step is I've got this bit of bandage. What I wanted to use as camouflage netting, or I may use this camouflage netting, I'm not sure yet. So I've decided to make a mix of Vallejo 7881 green yellow, which is probably a lot brighter than any camouflage netting actually was, but we've got to make some visual interest in there. Got to make it interesting to the viewer. If it's just one massive olive drab, it's not going to hold somebody's attention. So I'm just going to throw that in there, mix it round, and then string it up, let it dry, and come back to it and see what it looks like. If it's too light, we can start again, or we could darken it down and dry brush it with some of this, but we can't do anything until we have the first go. That's what I like about modelling. It's not an exact science, and the only way that you can get to the result what you want is to test and test again. That's the finished netting, and I'm quite pleased with it. Yeah, we'll be using that. The MIG muddy ground was applied last night, and I'm really happy with it. It's set lovely, it's got texture to it, it's raised, and it looks really good. I've moved on quite a bit with the tank and got to this stage. The additional Resicast Stowage is now on. Tools, I've painted those separately and glued them on with super glue. The one-piece stowage at the back is finished, and now I'm just attaching the Panzeschreck ammunition on with some sewing thread, and then also the Panzeschreck. I'm just tying that down. I've super glued it in position to hold it while I'm tying it. I've used the suggestions from the Miniart packaging, which are Dunkelgelb AMIG 10, dark brown AMIG 76 and green AMIG 2. There are some PE parts on it at the back and also at the front, including part of the handle and the strap. The camouflage netting is done and it actually looks quite authentic. All of the different components are coming together and really lifting the diorama. I must say thank you to my friend Keith for making the 966 and also the aim and the blue triangle of the Sherwood Rangers. The tank nearly completed. I'm just putting on some dried earth splashes from the MIG range. It's MIG 1750, and I'm just touching on some little splashes of dried dirt. The whole idea behind this tank was to emphasise the difference in coloration between the olive drab and an exercise in trying to look as different as possible. I think that's enough. Just brings out that we have put some mud on there. Obviously the tank is always going to get some dirt on it, it's never going to be completely dirt free. I didn't want to make it an exercise in the production of dirt. It always was going to be a exercise in emphasising the difference between the light and shade of the tank, getting some contrast in it, getting some colour in there, and by using the stowage and the tools to bring out some colour and make it look more interesting to the viewer and holding the viewer's attention for as long as possible. Panzer Aces 315 is my go-to colour for dried mud. I've just finished dry brushing the mud that's on the inside of the hull, and that's started to bring it out, give it some depth, make it look as though it's 1 inch or 2 inches thick, and also give it that impression that it's starting to dry. Also just lightly dry brush the mud that's on the outside of the bogies as well. I don't think earlier I mentioned that the vertical bars that are on the bogie assemblies, they were actually dry brushed with white before I painted them in green, and that's why they're standing out so well. I'm making a start on the diorama now, so I've cut several pieces of foam. I'm wanting this piece to be the road, this area, and then we're going to have a slight rise, but in the middle I'm going to put a fence and then raise that up to represent the village green in Bleakershow. grind down the edges, and then put some sort of filler in there and build it up and start developing the diorama. What I like to do when I'm working with foam and gluing it together is just rub the back of it up with a saw. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Then apply the Gorilla Glue, put it in some clamps, leave it overnight, and then there's no chance of it curling up as the glue expands. I've decided to use some of this, the natural texture for rough terrain. Just scooped a little bit of that out, and into it I've added some Vallejo Dark Earth from the Model Air range, and it's come out in a reasonable mud colour. Quite happy with that. So what I thought I'd do is use that for this surface, slowly build it up. Until we get a finish on it. So that's a slope finish. I'm quite happy with that. I did think it might just want to slide back down there if it was just a little bit too runny. I've not added any water to it, although you can do. But yeah, quite happy with that. So I'm going to go ahead and use the white with some paint in it to cover the rest of the surface, and then I'll build up a centre section so we get a little natural depression where cars and vehicles would have previously run on this road. Because, you know, in 1944 I'm not sort of sure what state this road would have been in, how it would have been constructed. Doubt very much it would have been tarmac, although it could have been some sort of forerunner to the tarmac roads we have now. I really have no idea. So as long as it looks like a road but not anything like the M1, then I'm going to be quite happy with that. Coat applied. I'm going to leave that now so it can set. Hopefully that should set overnight, and I'm going to go and cut some veneer now and see about making the edges, and we'll come back and do the final coat maybe tomorrow. So this is a diorama as it stands at the moment. Foam base is done, got the fence posts in, and the AK texture has dried very nicely on the top. And the idea was to build up these areas to make two indentations for a track. Thinking about it, what I should have done was made them in the first place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it outside, I'm going to use my Proxon tool and a grinding wheel, sanding wheel, and just grind two troughs running along the diorama in there, and then I'll recover it and we'll continue working from there. So I've ground that down. Very impressed with that, how hard that is, properly adhered to the surface, and it's not come off at all, it's not chipped off, it's all had to be ground down. Very durable texture. And what I was thinking of is, if you're going to use anything like this for your diorama, when that's wet, that would be the ideal time to put something like this in, maybe even when it's just as thin as that is, and that would stick in there and glue itself into the surface as it dries and be, you know, very firmly fixed in there. But moving back to the tank, sits down in them grooves really well and gives it that appearance of some weight. I wanted to get some colour variation into the diorama now, so I've started off by spraying this upper area in what is MIG Ammo brown soil 0076. So let's go ahead and put that on and we'll start working from there. Obviously this will be grassed, but it's just giving us some variation in tone, so it's not one monochrome colour as we're looking at our diorama. Right, so that's the That's this area painted in a different colour, painted in that darker brown. I'll find something to do this area in, and then this track, obviously it's a little bit lower, more of a tendency to hold moisture, so we'll paint that a little bit darker than what it is. I'll also just colour in here with this original colour, so you get a little bit of variation in it, ever so slightly. So I've just put some Model Air 041 in the airbrush, which is dark armour, or armour dark rather. I'm just going to start touching in along the track area. The armour brown colour is a little bit too ready for my liking, so I'm going to go over it with some black wash from the Vallejo Game Colour range. The next step is to try and bring out some of the texture. To do that, I'm going to dry brush the surface of these three parts of the diorama with a light brown colour. So I'm using one of the Vallejo dry brushes with a nice round head. Here I've got some sage from the Swartz line of seasoning products. I've thinned out the larger stuff with the aid of a fine sieve, and I'm just going to sprinkle the fine particles onto the glued area, and that'll just give the impression of some mossy ground and some dead grass underneath our static grass, which I'm going to put on later. Also, I've got some 4mm patchy grass from Pico, so I'm just going to dribble some of that on it and then again press it down with the brush. I've randomly applied some static grass glue, and the grass I'm going to use is 4mm Autumn. 2mm green static grass has now been added to make it look more like springtime. I've now finished the verged area, and with the different colours and textures and a few aftermarket products, and the fence is really starting to come together. I've gone ahead and cut all four sides for the veneer. I've just made them ever so slightly oversized, and this is the first time I've worked with veneer. So what I have found is, as soon as you put it on and the glue starts to absorb into the veneer wants to curl. So instantly you've got to turn it over, press it down and put a large weight on there. So it's just a case of gently working with a scalpel, just cutting off tiny slivers at a time till we get to the height that we want. That's the diorama completely finished. I've cut away the veneer to match the profile of the track. The grass is finished and dry, and you've got several different tones in there to give it an indication of a bit of an unloved and untouched area, not just looking like somebody's prized lawn. I've put several different pieces of aftermarket plants on there and finished it off with a nameplate: Lieutenant David Render, Bleakesau, France, 1944. It's finally finished, and thanks for watching this far. The diorama complements the tank extremely well. All of the small elements of this build have now come together to add interest, from the netting, nameplate, stowage, tools, figure, decals, and even the helmet with the bullet holes in it. I'm delighted with the results, and the whole project has turned out much better than I imagined. If you've enjoyed or found this video interesting, then please subscribe. I'm really excited about my next project. It's going to be something different, working with a different medium than I've worked with before. It'll be a lot quicker build and a lot shorter video, as the whole vignette only consists of about 8 or 9 parts. So now that you watched the video, why don't you get yourself a new kit from your local model shop, and then when it's done, why not consider taking it along to your local model club. Happy model building, and stay safe.